A very good afternoon, and I represent the Ayurveda Chikitsalayam Research Institute, the Parents Institute, which has been involved in a lot of practice-based evidence. And this particular presentation, I know, is a very primitive kind of clinical study, but then we go and believe in going a harder way, because we know that any clinical double-blind clinical trial is not conceived all of a sudden. So there are various states of evidence which we go from level 3 to level 2 to level 1. And as you see this particular clinical design, it is level 3B, which is just a pilot retrospective observational study to evaluate the efficacy of customized Ayurvedic therapy on type 2 diabetes having secondary failure to an oral hypoglycemic drug. Now, what is secondary failure of oral hypoglycemic drug? So, if a patient with type 2 diabetes feels the need that the existing therapy is not sufficient enough to maintain the glycemic control, we say it is a secondary failure. So, either the patient has to switch to another drug or has to go to a combination therapy or at latter phase go on insulin. And there is a persistently higher glycemic index which can be measured in terms of fasting sugar or postprandial or HbA1c. But this particular retrospective study is only restricted to fasting and postprandial sugar level, because we have taken this whole model of studies from the clinic to the laboratory. So it is a kind of reverse pharmacology where it is not possible always practically when you are documenting randomly all the patients in a clinic. You may not get the gold standards at initial stages. So this is the first stage as to prove that yes, is there something going on with Ayurvedic, customized Ayurvedic therapy. Now, what is the background of the disease? We know that there are a lot of meta-analysis available which shows that the existing metformin or existing standard therapy has been undergoing secondary failure, and we find out that there is enough evidence that the metformin fails after 16.9 months. That is roughly around 1.5 years, the effect of the metformin deteriorates. Similarly, the sulfonylurea, which is another set of insulin sensitizing medicine, also has said to be failing with around 74 months of active treatment. Now, if you also see, many studies are now publishing where monotherapy has been into a combined therapy. This is also undergoing a secondary failure. So that is the gap in the existing system as to, because how did this idea come to us? Because most of the patients who visits our clinic, they come with a primary aim of treatment of diabetes. And when we find out as to what is the cause, then we see that they don't have enough glycemic control. So that's how we started doing a selective, though there is a selection bias in this whole study, but we had started going through our whole database where we have done a retrospective analysis as to how many patients came to us. So what we did is we took number of patients who came to us with a main symptom as diabetes, who had come for a primary complaint for management of diabetes. We found that there were 1,072 patients, because we have been slowly evolving our own documentation methodology under guidance of Dr. Raman. So that's why we have been able to know as to how many patients came with as a main primary complaint of diabetes to managed by the Ayurveda. So we found out there were 1,072 patients. Out of there, we had only considerable data for 194 patients. That means even though we have implemented our documentation program, still maybe with all the clinical activities and all the infrastructure we have created, yet we are not able to document as the whole. But with the existing patient of 94, based on inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria, we were able to delineate 25 solid cases which we had firm analysis available. And then the basic inclusion criteria were they should be on therapy, that is combination therapy with metformin, with sulfonylurea or any other oral hypoglycemic drug. But their postprandial sugar should be more than 126 even after on oral hypoglycemic drug, fasting, and the postprandial should be more than 200. And then inclusion criteria that they should be no diabetic more than 1 year, and they should not be less than 20 years and not more than 60 years. And the general consenting as a process of our hospital care was taken. Then we had excluded all type 1 diabetes, pregnant women, renal failure cases, myocardial infarction cases, presence of severe complication of diabetes and other systemic disorders. So we had seen that, okay, we are taking just pure diabetic cases, and we had done a appropriate t-test, paired t-test, and we found out that as we had more female patients, as to 60% of people for patient population was female and 40% was male, and we found out as to what was the average age at which they visited our clinic. We found out around 49.4%. At the age of 49.4, that means around their middle age, around 50 they come to us. And total number of visits, at least what was required to bring down what kind of glycemic index change we have found was 5.76 visits. That means around 6 visits is required. And what is the duration of, minimum duration of treatment what we require is around not least than 5 weeks. At least 5 weeks of treatment is required. And then status of previous medication, we were able to reduce in certain cases, but in some cases we were able to taper, and some cases we were not able to do that. And if you see the results, that we were in 92% of cases we were not able to reduce the dosage pattern, but yes, we were able to reduce their fasting and postprandial level. But then in 4% cases each, we had been able to stop oral hypoglycemic medication as well as reduce the dosage. If you see what was the change we found out that before we started our treatment, the baseline fasting blood sugar in these cases were 179, which is way beyond 126 available or destined glycemic control. And with our treatment, it has come down to 136. And similarly, postprandial average was 288, and we were able to see that it came down to 205, which we see that is highly significant improvement in the glycemic control in both fasting as well as postprandial at the level of 95% of confidence interval as well as at 99% confidence interval. What were the treatment algorithms? Generally we say it is like one drug, but what we did is we found out that many of the cases were not prameha. Generally we try to say we treat type 2 diabetes like pramehi. No, we have found out there were many people who were treated based on a dosha, avastha as well as other vyadis like arshas, pandu, kushta and vata vyadi. Or if it was in the Madhumeha section, it was Avarnajanya or Dhatuchayjanya. And then accordingly the treatment was given, where many a times we have never used the dedicated kashayams for Prameha Adhikara, and we have found out this particular results. So from this particular study we could just say that yes, maybe with our therapies we can ameliorate the glycemic control in type 2 diabetes patient having secondary failure, which is becoming a big area to contribute, where Ayurveda can play a bigger role. Limitation, definitely there was no randomization, no blinding, and there was a selection bias, as well as the gold standard glycosylated hemoglobin is not included, which I would like to say that this was just a proof of concept hypothesis, like proof of concept study for our next project which we are doing with Radha University, which is working on in a more advanced way as a prospective cohort study. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I would like to start by saying that I very much welcome this kind of study. Case studies and case series are called the forgotten half of medicine, and you quite rightly pointed out at the beginning something which points to the fact that evidence has to start without randomized controlled trials, and you have to have this kind of retrospective study. Now, there's something extraordinarily interesting that I've asked two of my students to do similar studies, one from an Ayurveda clinic in Kalyan, and one from an Ayurveda and herbal juices clinic in Bhopal, They're both doing retrospective studies of exactly this kind in order to assess the viability of a future randomized controlled trials. So I absolutely approve of what you've done. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Just a comment, it was a very good work and very well presented. Now that you have this things from a retrospective data collection, you could probably look at doing some prospective
that's what I told you.
collection.
This was the, in fact, proof of concept study we had submitted to Lafayette University. We have a collaborative study now ongoing where they asked for a proof of concept study. So since this is a very good inspiration for all of the Ayurvedic community as to how to see. We all talk about RCTs, but RCTs does not come all of a sudden. We have to build strong hypothesis to go for RCTs. So here in our institution we are practicing that levels of evidence, as to first create the first level of evidence and then slowly build on. So this was the why I presented. This is a work we did for our prospective cohort study, which is controlled, which then take us to 2B level of evidence. So this is that's what we have presented this case.
There's a great call for an understanding of the sociological effects of the availability of Ayurvedic clinics. Many people come to Ayurvedic clinics without previous experience of Ayurveda. They like what they find, and they make the Vaidyas they meet their primary physicians, and they become their primary care physicians. And the medical community as a whole, and ICMR, needs to know the vitally important role that Ayurveda plays in community medicine. So I would encourage you to do more studies which actually evaluate the whole effect of this particular AVP clinic within Coimbatore as a whole. Because I think the medical community needs to understand the acceptance and the role of Ayurveda in all places where it's available.
Thank you, sir. And we are developing algorithms as to, based on these evidence cases and case series, we are developing different algorithms which will be helpful for Ayurvedic students to understand. Don't just blindly compare issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you.